Hello, let's dive directly into Chapter 4, Personal, Legal, Ethical, and Organizational Issues of Information Systems. We're going to look at a couple things here today that are going to create a context for what we use information systems for and describe the environments that exist outside of the technology and shape the technology and how we use it. So first, let's go to our learning outcomes. The first outcome is we're going to look at information privacy and how to improve privacy of information. We're going to look how that pertains to email, data collection, and censorship. We're going to take a look at ethical issues related to IT. And we're also going to understand intellectual property and what infringement of intellectual property actually is and how we can avoid it. The next things we're going to look at is how information systems affect organizations, publishing, and connect workplace and employees. And in there, we're going to talk a little bit about different ways that employees can work because of information technology. And finally, we're going to describe green computing and how green computing works in this day and age. So first up is privacy. Now, privacy is something that we feel like is innate. We want to work, live in environments where we can control what information about us is being shared and understand what information about us is out there for others to consume. Privacy is a big deal nowadays. Most of the news headlines around information technology are about leaks and or breaches of privacy. So privacy is something that we need to take a good look at. Now, when it comes to information systems, employers have a different goal with privacy than the average consumer. Employers are more worried about protecting corporate secrets, strategic advantages, and they're also using social networking as a way to understand who their employees are. And that is what many feel like is an invasion of privacy. So when we're talking about privacy, you need to understand that what you consider private may not be what your employer considers private, and that they are using these tools to understand you and understand some of the things that you feel like may be private. Also, a lot of us feel like our computers are sacred, that they are private, that the way that I'm typing on my machine is uniquely mine and is for my eyes only. That may not be the case in corporate environments. A lot of corporate environments have monitoring systems that are designed to track everything that the employee does on that particular system. Now, what does that look like? It could be using a web history, using your browser history to understand where you've been, but it also could be something as innocuous and invisible as a key logger, something that logs every keystroke that you make and reports that back to a supervisor. So this is something to be aware of because, a key logger is going to capture every one of your passwords. It's going to capture every note or message you send to a friend, whether it be on Instagram or Facebook. It's going to capture all that stuff. So when we're thinking about privacy, we're thinking about the things that we believe we're doing either in secret or without others being able to see, but it is being captured through this digital media called the internet. And on the slide here, you see information technology is aided in the easy availability of personal information. And this means at best, your information is being used to market things and products to you. But at worst, this information could be used for more dubious practices. It can be used to capture your credit card information, fraud, all of that. Now, to go a little bit deeper into kind of the idea of web and network privacy, let's look at some phrases one phrase we've heard before, but maybe never really took a second look at, and see how this impacts information systems. So when you begin to engage on a particular network, a website or a social media platform, typically they have a acceptable use policy. And this is the organization saying what rules they will abide by to provide this service to you. So Facebook, Google, Apple Music, Spotify, all of these services have acceptable use policies. Now, what does that mean? It means that Google has told you by having Gmail, what they will do is look through every word of your email to give you advertisements. What they won't do is actually have a human being look through your email and come to conclusions about you. So that's the acceptable use policy. It is important to review these things. If you are not paying attention to what you are granting to these organizations because you're very interested in sharing your photos or very interested in having access to music at a low cost, you may be giving up a lot of rights which you feel like you should inherently have. So the acceptable use policy is not just a disclaimer for the company, which is how a lot of companies actually use it, but it is also a way for you to understand what you're sharing and whom you're sharing it with. The next kind of area is accountability. Now, this is a lot of times outlined in the acceptable use policy. It's also outlined sometimes in a privacy policy. And this tells what you're responsible for and what you're not responsible for on the network that you're using. WKU has one of these. It's called the computing policy. And the computing policy pretty much says if you're using a lab machine at Western Kentucky University, you can't engage in copyright infringement, you can't view pornography, and you can't engage in any real dubious or troublesome IT practices. This is, in essence, the cover your backside, we call it CYAs in union speak. This is the agreement that says you're responsible for what you do and you'll be held accountable for what you do on the organization's computer. And then the last one is kind of non-repudiation, which means that if something goes wrong, there's going to be a clause in there that says that the injured party, if it's the organization, has a means to seek out, not necessarily retribution, but to seek justice, to seek accountability. So these three different, concepts are very important because just think, if you would, pull out your hand and count how many different web networks or web platforms you're using. If I'm just thinking out loud, I have a Facebook account, I have a Twitter account, I have a TopNet account, I have accounts with different little magazines that I visit. And you may have more. You may also have an Instagram account. You may have a Snapchat account. So with all these different things, a Gmail account, with all these different platforms that you're using, you are, in essence, granting a great deal of flexibility and information to these networks. And you may not understand what all you are allowing them to have and to use. And if they use it, they're going to use it in a way that may be flattering to you, or you might be the butt of a joke on a Facebook commercial. But you need to understand these things because they do make a big deal in how you are using technology. So we're talking about kind of the concepts of network policy. Let's look at some guidelines to actually help you minimize the invasion of privacy. There's a couple key things you can do. The first thing you can do is only do business or personal business or, of course, corporate business with companies or websites that have privacy policies. And just the fact that they have a privacy policy means that there is some accountability in terms of if there is a breach of your privacy. The next thing is you need to limit the personal information that you allow them to access. Now, let's bring this home to something that is very realistic to many of us. When you download an app onto your phone, a lot of times you have to grant it access to your camera, grant it access to your microphone, or you may have to tie it to your Facebook account or your Google Plus account to be able to get all the features. And then it'll ask you, do you want to authorize this to post on your behalf, to send messages, to view your contacts. And if you don't limit those things, the organization that is granting you the use of that app is going to take advantage. And that's important that you know that. They're not asking for access just for funds, for giggles. They want that information to make a buck, to market, to sell advertising space, so on. So make sure you're limiting access to the personal information that you're allowing these different platforms to use, and make sure that you limit it to the absolute minimum. The next thing you want to take a look at is ensuring that the data is reliable, that the stuff that you're providing is true and that it cannot be misused, making sure that it's not one piece of data that leads to something else. Okay. Now, we want those organizations to have a stated data collection policy and a purpose saying how they're going to use your data. If that's not stated, assume the worst. So you want to make sure that you know how they're going to use your pictures. If those pictures are just storage for you to use how you like, or are they going to advertise those or use those in marketing campaigns overseas? And then make sure that you can prevent personal information from being gathered without consent. Now, a very practical example of this is how you share your pictures, your birth date, your relationship status on Facebook. If there are measures in Facebook to allow you to control who can access this data, make sure you're using those, because the people who ask for consent to use your personal data typically aren't the threats that you have to worry about. You normally have to worry about the people who are trying to circumvent consent and to use your data or personal information without getting any consent. So make sure that you're paying attention to that. There's a few more of those we want to look at. Organizations should verify to ensure data accuracy. If you're doing business with an information system, you want to make sure that you're verifying the information you're getting. You want to make sure that data is correct and that outdated data is deleted. To give you another example of that, if you think about Facebook, in the past when people have died or become deceased, what happened to their Facebook page? Well, a lot of times it just stayed out there, and that was incorrect. It was giving the impression that someone was alive who was not. So, how do we make sure that no unauthorized access or misused data is out there? And these are the policies that organizations have to put together. Users should view their records and correct inaccuracies. As someone who manages a large database, it's not very easy to get users to correct their records when there are inaccuracies. But as a database administrator, it's still the role of this person to be engaging in activities to make sure this stuff is up to date. And then finally is transparency. And transparency is exactly what you're looking for from an organization. You want an organization that has a clear policy on how they're handling data and that it is transparent, meaning that everyone has access to see how their information is being used. And that is more important than you would imagine. A lot of times, there's a lot of trust that we do with these systems, with these organizations, and a lot of times this trust is misused. So having transparency in record keeping and storing personal data is an absolute gem. So this is the stuff that we're aware of. This is the stuff that's right out there that is not trying to deceive us necessarily, but these privacy issues are things that if we just take a little time, we can avoid and make sure that we come out on the right side of these. Let's talk a little bit about some things that are a little deceptive. And things that invade our privacy, but not necessarily are straightforward. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is spam. Now, spam is named after a meat that is kind of a collection of a whole bunch of other meats. And that's why it's called spam. It's just kind of a bulk bobulation, if that is a word, of one type of product and another. Now, when we say spam in terms of email, this is unsolicited email sent to your message inbox. Now, spam is normally bulk, it's automated, and it is a way of just trying to fish to see who's out there and who's willing to bite. Now, spam is very annoying, but there are things out there that can save you from spam, and there's spam blockers, there's spam filters that most modern email servers have. But privacy issues, spam is definitely a big one. And to think about it, when you're on a corporate system, you should assume that others have access to your messages. Okay? The Your Gmail account is a very private account, but your WKU account is a corporate, well, not corporate, but a company owned account. So any emails you send in your WKU account are backed up, they're put in long-term storage, and they are also the property of Western Kentucky University's IT Center. So what does that mean? It means that if you want to send something privately or something that you want to keep just between you and the recipient, your WKU email is not the right platform for that, nor is any other kind of corporate email account you have. And I imagine that your Gmail account is also subject to some provisions due to their privacy policy. So when we're thinking about email, there's spam, there's ease of use. There's also something called phishing, where emails are constructed to look like legitimate email organizations just for the sole purpose of getting your login credentials and all that. So there are a lot of privacy issues just around email. And it's because we use email so often that we don't give it the scrutiny it deserves in understanding whether or not email has potential security leaks, if you will, that put us at risk, at least put our information at risk. Now, that's email. Let's talk about data collection on the web. Due to the increase of everything happening on the web, social media, dating sites, online shopping, personal personal information is being collected on the web and sold to telemarketers, and that's where the spam is coming from. So if you are very liberal in how you use the internet, what sites you sign up for, what email addresses you put into those sites, there's a relationship between how many online free things you sign up for and how much spam you're going to get. And know that information on the web can be combined with other information and technologies to produce even more sensitive information about you. Okay? And on the web, it's not just you entering your name in a box or your email address in a box. There are also little tracking things that web developers can use to learn more about you. One's called a cookie. You've probably heard of cookies at this point. And a cookie is just a little bitty text file that they put in your browser, and it lets them track where you go from one place to another. There was a big uproar a couple years back about Verizon putting a zombie cookie on all Verizon phones. And this was anyone who had a Verizon phone, whether they wanted it to or not, Verizon was tracking every website they visited on their phone. And with this cookie, they could figure out everywhere you went. You didn't have a way to turn it off. They could see where you were going on your website, and they were using that information for whatever use they wanted to use it on. Now, we could optimistically believe that they were using that information just to optimize their network, or we could pessimistically believe that they were using that information to advertise to Verizon users and to understand shopping habits and everything they can, but we don't know. And that's something we have to be careful about, is that these cookies, or even the case of a log file where something is logging everything you do, this speaks to who you are. And whether or not you want corporations to have this level of access to your internal decision making and things like that is your choice. But I encourage you to be proactive in understanding what is being shared and deciding what is going to be shared. Now, when we talk about data collection, this brings up ethical issues, and I think that's what we just saw with Verizon. There are a lot of opportunities to behave unethically with information systems. And we see this evidenced by cybercrime, cyber fraud, identity theft, intellectual property theft. That's bootlegging music and movies. And if we think about what have the news stories been around, what have they been talking about here recently? It's all about cybercrime and identity theft. Your information is in so many different places that if I want to steal your identity, I don't necessarily hack the IRS, even though people are doing that. I can simply go to Facebook and use the information that I know about you from Facebook and use that to gather more information. Or we see that organizations are also victims of this type of behavior. Sony last year was hacked by China, and a lot of their product, which is digital, which is movies, was stolen and released for free. And that did have an impact on their bottom line. So one thing that we can do to get around this unethical behavior is making sure that organizations have a code of ethics, and not just having it, but enforcing it, training staff members to behave ethically when they work on computers, and also giving them incentives to behave ethically. So that is one of the main things we have to make sure that we are being proactive with as information technologists. We have to make sure that we are encouraging ethical behavior and making sure that we're rewarding ethical behavior. Now, ethics leads us to the next topic, which is censorship. Now, most corporate systems engage in some type of censorship, whether it be not allowing pornography on a website, you name it. Censorship is happening. Now, a lot of times with public information, it is censored in terms of what can be public and what cannot be public. So if you were to log on to the WKU website and go to the directory in the corner and search your name, it's not going to give back all of your information. It's going to be censored down to just the stuff that is important. And then the other stuff that is non-really identifying, they may share. So censored context is definitely there. For public organizations, sometimes they censor offensive things that are religious, sometimes things that are cultural. For private things, people are censor the post that a person makes. I think it was Reddit recently. They got in trouble for censoring the post of users. But there's a lot of nuanced things that happen in this area. We were talking about those forces in the last chapter, about those 5 forces, and some of those forces determine how the censorship policies are built. And there's interplay there. What may be good for the buyer may not be good for the seller, or the reverse. And censoring information may help find a happy medium. Now, that's kind of censorship at a corporate level, but we can look at it from a very large level, like governments and organizations, which censor the web access. Some countries like China censor it a little bit, deciding what messages are allowed to get through. They use this to kind of censor the press, censor dissidents, to censor dissidents or people who are unhappy with the current regime. So this type of restricting access is happening at very high levels. The United States claims to be very neutral with this, making sure that everyone can show anything, but there's censorship happening. So if sometimes when you visit a website and it doesn't come up, it may not be a hardware issue. It may be that website is censored and that you're unable to reach it. Now, parents do this, of course, with their children. They use web tools like Cyber Patrol, SafeSurf. I know with my children, I do monitor closely what they are watching. I haven't implored deployed any of these programs as of yet to keep them from watching certain websites. But, what is viewed, experienced by my children is something that's pressingly on my mind. And, censorship is certainly an option out there for parents. Some of you all may be parents or thinking about being parents, and this might be an option you'll choose to use if and when that happens. Now, when we think about censorship and we think about trying to limit what people are seeing, we're also, in essence, talking a little bit about intellectual property, because censorship that blocks intellectual property, like news sites or whatever, we consider that against some of the fundamental rights that people feel like they have in using the internet. But if we talk about intellectual property, let's look at it from the aspect of a product. So intellectual property is something that someone creates. It's intellectual because it's not something tangible. If I have a great idea on how to help people communicate with pictures, that's not really a tangible product. So it's my property, intellectual. It's my idea and I own it. And it is very difficult to not necessarily control, but it is difficult to protect intellectual property. So there are a couple things legally we do. It's copywriting, things that are written, trademarking logos, having secrets, trade secrets, and patenting processes that we think will protect us for at least a certain amount of time. The categories of intellectual property are very broad. Some is industrial property. That's inventions, trademark logos, industrial designs. Copyrighted material. This is literary works, websites, code, programming, computer graphics. Interestingly enough, anything that is published is considered copyrighted. So there's arguments happening today in this day and age about whether or not the stuff that you put on Twitter is your copyrighted material. There was some backlash with Conan O'Brien, who's being sued by a Twitter user who believes that Conan O'Brien stole some of his jokes that he used on Twitter. So copyrighted material is one of the larger categories, and this is the stuff that's being created every day. When you publish a note on Facebook, that's your material. It's something that you've created, you copyrighted it. When you retweet it, or repost something on Facebook, or share a post on Facebook, you're actually using someone else's material, and you're falling under this fair use doctrine, which says that you can use copyrighted material for a couple different purposes. One is education. I think you can do satires, but all this stuff, there's legal precedent that surrounds it and really controls how we're doing these things. To move forward a little bit, let's dive into trademarks a little bit. Trademarks protect product names and identifying marks, and then a patent really protects a process. A lot of industrial organizations, the way that they build things, these are processes that have been patented, which means that particular way to build that widget, only they can do. And that helps protect them so they can make money. They can license that patent to other companies to receive royalties. It allows them to raise money for research and development. And it keeps competitors from entering certain market segments. Now, whether or not you feel like that is a good thing or a bad thing, it certainly is advantageous to organizations. And, in this class, we've been talking a lot about return on investments. A strong patent can be a very good return on investment, because that's intellectual property that can turn quickly into liquidatable assets. Now, if we're talking about intellectual property, if we're looking at stuff that is governed by the law, let's talk about laws that protect intellectual property holders on the internet. Now, the main thing we're going to talk about is cyber piracy, software piracy. The big one we're looking at is the 1980 revisions to the Copyright Act. which in essence said that computer programs are also something that can be copywritten. Okay. Now, for the next three items on here, the Telecommunications Act of 1996, the Communications Decency Act, and laws against spamming, I'm going to leave that to you to read. That way we know that you're doing those readings. Okay. So those are the laws. Let's talk about another issue, which is called cyber squatting, which I was accidentally saying earlier. Cyber squatting is, in essence, sticking a flag in a domain name and doing that for someone else's name, or using the name of a company that you think will be profitable and hoping that eventually that domain address will become so popular that you can almost extort the person who you squatted on for money. We see it a lot of times with rising athletes. If someone is a great high school basketball player, kind of cyber scouts will find that person's name and buy their name.com. And then when they do begin to materialize into the prophecy of their excellence, either on or off the field, they then have to purchase their name, not from GoDaddy for $14.99, but from Billy Bob's Cyber Farm for $15,000 or $16,000. So cyber squatting is something that a lot of times people are unhappy with, and a lot of lawsuits are over cyber squatting. Another one is typo squatting, and this is just based on people making mistakes. So a good example is if you type in a typo of Google, it's very likely that it'll take you to Google. But some people have been very creative, and since the I is next to the O on the keyboard, they might do Google, but actually, by the domain name GIIGLE. And that way, in case you accidentally hit the I twice instead of the O's, and you land on their website. Sometimes it's benign. Sometimes this is just them hijacking a URL to get some extra traffic, which they sell advertisements on. Other times, these people are impersonating the website that you're going to and hoping that you will put in your personal information. Either way, these two behaviors are definitely discouraged, in some cases illegal, and this is something you should be aware of. You have got to verify where you're going on the web and make sure you're getting to where you actually want it to go. Let's talk about the digital divide. And in essence, this is just the people who are on the internet and the people who are not on the internet. And this does create kind of gaps, both socioeconomically and educationally, for different individuals in America, the United States, the globe, or worldwide. So there are some ways that this can be approached. There used to be a laptop for every child campaign a couple years back. There's increase in funding for computers in schools, and there's technology becoming cheaper to help close the digital divide. But this is one of the big issues. A lot of the world is moving to digital versions of what used to be tangible things. Instead of you buying a book, you buy access to an ebook. Instead of you receiving your results from the doctor's office, paper versions, now many times you receive an email. And this makes it difficult for people who are not able to get on the internet to participate in things that used to be very attainable without a whole lot of technology. So the digital divide is out there. It is closing, but it is still immense. Let's look at the impact of information technology in the workplace. Information technology is everywhere, and it's led to a lot of things. It's led to the creation of some technical jobs. It's increased people's ability to buy things. They can search and find things a lot cheaper. And it's even changed how jobs are, the nature of jobs. People now can telecommute from home. working at their house. A lot of times organizations can outsource where their different functions are based on what the most cost effective way to do that is. We even have what's called job de-skilling, when skilled labor is eliminated due to high technology. Now, information systems is a big driver of this. If you think about it, in not even in the recent past, it used to be if you wanted to file your taxes, you had to find an accountant, or you had to go and get an accounting student on campus to help you out. Now, what do? You go down to Sam's or Walmart, you buy a copy of TurboTax, type your stuff in there, and you're done. So this is an example of job de-skilling, where skilled labor tasks have been reduced or eliminated, these positions, due to very intelligent technology. And then finally, our virtual organizations. And these are companies where everything is done via information technologies. So they kind of share the skills and they share the cost, and everyone has access to each other's markets. Virtual organizations is a very interesting concept. I'd like for you to look into that a little bit more, because not only are we seeing tasks being kind of digitized, but now we're even seeing organizations that can thrive without really having a physical office space or anything like that. Now, let's talk a little bit more about telecommuting. Couldn't get that out. And we'll see that there are some benefits and some drawbacks, both personally and organizationally. When we're thinking about some of the benefits, studies say that people are more productive when they work at home. They work more than they would if they came to work, because when you drive into work, you're only going to work while you're there for the most part. And you're less likely to have people turn over and leave, because they can, again, work from home, and you save the money. You don't have to pay for an office. You don't have to pay to air condition it. You don't have to pay to turn on the lights, because the employee is doing that on their own, because they're paying for their own electricity. Some of the drawbacks, it's difficult to regulate this type of activity. It's also difficult to create boundaries from when someone's at work or at home, which can lead to people working all the time and burning themselves out. What happens if someone gets hurt when they're at home? Is that a workman's comp claim, or is that something they have to carry on their own? And then finally, you can't really get the necessary supplies or equipment. If someone is telecommuting, do they drive into the office to pick up a notepad and then take that home? Is that something that would be allowed, or is that something that they're expected to provide on their own? So there's a lot of different benefits and drawbacks to this style of work. And this is something completely the result of kind of this information age, and how information systems have broadened this whole concept of work from just being a place where you go and punch in to just making sure that the desired activities are done. So if we're talking about these kind of different ways that people work, well, the way that we work has an impact on our health, and there are some health issues that come from information technology work. There's stress, which comes from any job, but certainly it is a part of IT work. With the popularities of touchscreens, the wear and tear on our fingers, arms, and eyes is at an all-time high. It's not just typing now, it's touching the screen. It's sitting in ways that are damaging to your back. And it's also staring at a light bulb for extended portions of the day. This leads to vision issues. It leads to skeletal issues and how you sit. Skin issues because you're not getting outside. Stress issues, and sometimes the stress issues can lead to reproductive system issues. So there is a lot of health-related things that we should be concerned about when it comes to IT. It's not just getting the job done, but it's making sure that staff and employees are in environments where they can get the job done and continue to have healthy lives and healthy lifestyles. And then let's take one last look at something called green computing. And green computing, in essence, is helping the world remain sustainable while we're doing computing. And you can see that this is a part not only of how we dispose of the computer, but how it is designed, how it's manufactured. How do we get rid of it? And how do we do all this without impacting the environment? Well, minimally impacting the environment. It requires cooperation from private and public sectors. So the government and the manufacturer need to be on board. They need to understand each other and identify this as a goal. It also means that we have to design things to last longer. Something modular, something we can upgrade without replacing the entire thing. You know, Apple is really good at creating recyclable machines, but I don't think they do a very good job at creating upgradable machines. You know, the MacBook you buy is kind of the MacBook you're stuck with. That's not the case with some PCs, because a lot of times with PCs, you can go in there and upgrade certain parts, which I believe is far better for the world on a whole than just having a machine that is stuck exactly how it is and the lifespan is limited. Something else we can do is make search engines that are faster and compute faster. Now think about it. Why does computing matter? Well, when Google runs a search, if it has a search that runs for 2 seconds, and 2 seconds doesn't seem like a lot, but they can reduce it to 1.5 seconds. You may think, well, that's not even really a big deal. But if we think about it, that's 2 seconds, and then there's 2 billion searches in a day. Well, then that's 4 billion seconds of computing time. Well, if we cut a half a second off, that goes from 4 billion seconds of computing time to 3 billion seconds of computing time. And that is a significant change in energy consumption. So when we're optimizing these things, it's not just speed for ease of use, but something that runs faster, runs quicker, runs with less resources, actually has an impact on how much oil, natural gas, or solar energy we have to collect to run those machines. And let's throw wind in there as well. Something else is replacing smaller servers with a bigger one that's optimized to run faster than the smaller ones it's replacing. Using computing devices that use less energy and that will biodegrade. And I think that's one of the next steps here, is making sure that we can find things that will biodegrade. And then allowing certain employees to work from home. If they don't have to drive in, they don't have to produce a whole lot of carbon to get there. And to support that, conduct meetings over computer networks, Skype, Join Me, GoToMeeting, these things. And then something we can all do is turn off idle PCs. If we're not using it, turn it off. Treat it like a light bulb. So that's chapter 4. We're getting close to the end of this part of the book. We've been doing the content quizzes. We've had some troubles as a group, maybe not you individually. So we're going to make sure, well, going forward, you're going to have 2 attempts on those quizzes. And we're also going to have a practice exam for the first exam come up later next week. Okay? And with that practice exam, it's optional. It's going to have every question that could possibly be on the test, and a lot of questions that will definitely not be on the test. But the more you practice, the more a better chance you're actually going to see a question that'll be on the test. And I suggest you do it. You can do it as much as you want, and it's going to help you get better prepared for the test. With that said, I hope you guys are having a great week. I hope you've been able to go to some football games or watch them on TV. Go Tops. We're 2-0 at this point. We may not stay with that record for much longer, but that's where we are now. And I hope you're enjoying the course. If you have some feedback, let me know. Shoot me an email. And then otherwise, I will see you all, or communicate with you all again in the next lecture.